This is show 384. God, is it really that many? Of the Paddock Pass podcast. We, or should I say the hatted pit lane stalwart that is David Emmett, have recovered from the Sepang test, and we're recording this a week before the second and final go-round in Qatar. I'm Adam Wheeler, and it's an immense privilege, as always, to be joined by David and the king of bass and growl, Neil Morrison. On this show, we'll discuss the Red Bull KTM factory racing and Repsol Honda team launches, and answer some questions from listeners sent to us through Patreon. Speaking of which, don't forget to sign up with us for the year at a 10% discount for access to all our Paddock Note shows from every single day of each Grand Prix, as well as other special content. Head to patreon.com and Paddock Pass Podcast for the easy sign up. It's only a few days until fresh note shows will be posted from LaSalle. Before we move on, a reminder that KTM are celebrating 30 years of their distinctive naked bike, the Duke, and have some new models that were unveiled at a special launch event in Spain. KTM have mined the versatile LC8C engine platform to create the 990 Duke for a new ceiling of performance that will blast any country road. Count on first-class electronics, ergonomics, high-quality components, endless torque, and awesome looks. Have a look at ktm.com for more info on the brand new 2024 990 Duke. More KTM in a moment, because the freshest launch was Repsol Honda in Madrid. We know that Repsol tend to treat the media quite shabbily, but the event was classy. And,
You still haven't forgiven them for that coffee, have you?
yeah, pathetic people. But, the event kind of ticked the boxes. Most significantly, Dave, there was far less Repsol and much more Honda on these bikes.
Well, yes. I mean, Marcus is gone, so the advertising value is less for Repsol. But on the other hand, it's going to make very little difference to Honda, because a lot of the money that came in from Repsol actually went directly into Marcus's bank account. So in the end, I'll probably end up with the same amount of money to actually spend on the project, on the bike and all the rest of it. And yeah, it's a big improvement. I mean, to me, what I liked most about it was the fact that because they're Red Bull have gone as well, and so and they've prevented anyone from they've prevented any other energy drink from sponsoring Repsol Honda, and the helmets look fantastic because they actually look. There's a lot more room to actually create a unique helmet design, and I think both Luca Marini and Joan Mir, their helmets are going to be sort of immediately recognizable, and I wonder whether we'll see a lot of replicas, because they do look very nice.
Spoken like a man who likes his coffee black and without any thrills. Ban the energy drinks. Neil, was there any more humility to the Repsol Honda team launch? I think, you had the usual characters, Kawata-san and also Alberto Puig commenting. There was lots of kind of remarks about restarting, working hard, getting the whole engineering base in Japan, everybody motivated to improve in the whole project. A lot of platitudes as well, the usual kind of stuff from the riders. Luca Marini, again, showing his intelligence by doing most of it in Spanish as well. But not many revelations apart from the most sort of stubborn livery being changed for a lot more black.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I wasn't at the Repsol launch like you. I've been blacklisted for slagging off the lack of coffee and caffeinated beverages. But yeah, from what I could see of the presentation that was just recorded there before we started the show, the Honda are in no... they're in no doubt as to the kind of predicament they're in, and they're not expecting a quick fix. And I think most of the comments from the two riders and Alberto Puig and Kawata-san pretty much indicated that. So it's going to be a bit of a slow recovery. I think the bikes look pretty cool. I think it's probably the most significant livery change that a Repsol Honda has had since Repsol came in as the title sponsor in 1995. So that's quite something, and I guess it does in some ways mark the start of this new era, this new chapter for Honda. So it's kind of fitting that now their most prized asset is gone. It's kind of fitting that they've got this new kind of color scheme to go with that. So I think they definitely understand what's ahead of them, but it seems that they've kind of got things in place to work in that way, which is definitely a lot more that can be said of Honda a year ago.
A quick question. I mean, I'm not sure who of both of you wants to answer, but Repsol Honda have actually had a special logo type made for their 30th anniversary. And it's quite telling that there is less Repsol on the motorcycles, and there is talk in the background of the deal maybe being trimmed a little bit. As you said, previously, Dave, Marc Marquez is not there anymore. Perhaps the media value or the whole intrinsic value of the sponsorship arrangement is less. But, there also were rumors that Repsol would not continue their sponsorship already 2 years ago in MotoGP. Do we think, this could be not only a period of transition for Repsol Honda? I think Luca Marini, one of his most telling comments was like, this is a new era for HRC. But it could very much be a new era for Honda full stop, not just in terms of riders or bike development.
Yeah, quite possibly. I think we saw a report on motorsport.com sometime towards the end of January, which indicated that there was a bit of tension between Honda or HRC and Repsol behind the scenes. And from what we can gather, it does seem that Repsol have decreased their kind of their spending, as Dave said, to Honda, and HRC thought that would then represent a kind of smaller bit of their fairing size, which I don't think Repsol took too kindly to. So yeah, it does seem there's a little bit of simmering tension behind the scenes. There certainly was coming up to this launch in the month that's gone before. So yeah, who knows whether that could result in Repsol parting ways. I mean, they're the most valuable Spanish asset that they've kind of been behind since 2013. In fact, before that, because they were behind Marc in both 125s and Moto2. He's departed for fresh pastures. So yeah, I guess some of it maybe depends on Marquez's movements. If he does come back to Honda in the next couple of years, maybe that'll keep Repsol in place.
I think there is also another factor, and that's the fact that we've gone to 40% renewables this year, and in 2027 we'll be going to 100% renewables. And MotoGP is just a fantastic laboratory. You've got incredibly extreme circumstances, and it's a great place to be developing stuff. There are very few other places for companies like Repsol to actually work in very, very extreme circumstances and start developing their fuels. And like data, I had a very interesting conversation with someone from Michelin in Sepang about Moto E, and they were saying like Moto E is really important to them because they have these tires made from renewable materials and recycled materials. It's just really, really important for them, all of the data that they gather in Moto E. And I think that the same is going to be true for Repsol in MotoGP. It's really useful. It's really this is the kind of data that you cannot get anywhere else, where you're running engines at very, very high under very high loads, under very high stresses. You're pushing the envelope of what your combustion can do, of what your fuels can do, and for sort of the long term, for the future, if Repsol are interested in making the switch to renewable fuels, which separate topic, but oil companies around the world have got billions and billions tied up in extraction facilities and oil wells and all the rest of it. But apart from that, if Repsol see a future for renewable fuels, then MotoGP is one of the best platforms for them to be developing that. We've heard this from Mobil One and KTM. We've heard this from other people as well.
Yeah, that was another one of the criticisms from the Repsol Honda launch last year. I mean, aside from being treated like rats, they wanted to chase out the building. They spoke very little about their efforts towards, sustainable and, eco-friendly fuels. That was something that I think was a lot more prevalent in the launch this time. So credit to them for, addressing the side of the sport that's going to be much more, I think, in sort of the narratives of people, both this season and the next couple of seasons to come. But yeah, we've seen the Repsol Honda launch, and just a couple of days before, sorry, Dave, you wanted to say something else there?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have an interview later on in which we talk about renewable fuels, but I shall just tease that here, and we'll hear more later.
Dave, you're getting all premature again. Easy.
Not for the first time.
Well, listen, Red Bull KTM also launched their team this week, and maybe in Repsol style, it was very much a case of not much change. Same riders, same management, structure, same livery. Neil, what did we kind of learn really from the presentation? I mean, it was just a couple of minutes online from the Austrians.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we really learned a great deal, to be honest, because, the fact of the matter is that Dave was talking to these guys just last week in Sepang, and speaking to some of the team members as well. And, we got to listen to the riders' debriefs. So it wasn't a great deal to learn. There was a few chances to kind of quiz Jack and Brad about certain things that they might have said. But I think the general takeaway is that KTM feel that they're ready to fight for the championship this year. Last year I think it was clear that the aim was to be at least fighting for the podium at every race weekend and fighting for the top three in the championship. And certainly Brad's comments, we spoke to Pit Beirer as well, head of motorsport, and he was saying that fighting for the championship is basically why they're here this year. It's kind of the next step up. So things seem pretty good there. There's still a couple of things to test. I'm not quite race ready just yet, but all indications from Sepang were that it was really positive. And I think a year ago, Brad definitely wasn't that positive about some of the testing that they did. He feels that they're certainly a lot closer now. So that was the sort of the takeaway. Nothing much to report on the livery front, sadly, but that was the sort of takeaway speaking to the riders.
Yeah, it's a good point about the livery, Neil. And also, Dave, what you were mentioning earlier about the limitations of energy drinks. It seems for Red Bull KTM in particular, there's not really a great deal of room to move away from that color scheme or for the real estate that, Red Bull need on the RC16.
Yeah, I mean, that's why they pay a sizable amount of money to be able to get their stuff plastered all over the place. But it does tend to dominate, because it dominates everything. It dominates the bike, but it also dominates the helmets. To me, the most annoying thing is that it does actually dominate the rider's helmet, because once you stick a Red Bull logo or even one of those monster claws on, there's not a lot of room left. I do think that, for example, Red Bull added to the gas bike actually looks really nice. That was a big improvement, I think. But the Red Bull KTM looks exactly like the Red Bull KTM. And I think also one of the reasons that the Red Bull or the KTM launch was perhaps less newsworthy is because Pit Beirer already spoke to us after the gas launch, so he didn't have a great deal to say about it, other than that we are getting one step closer to the 2027 regulations, which is going to be less aero, no ride height devices, a reduction in capacity, and that's about it.
I probably mentioned this on a previous podcast, but I went to Austria to take part in that video production, and it was amazing to watch the crew plus Brad Binder and Jack Miller spend basically the whole day doing photography and video for what was essentially a 2.5 minute production. I mean, it does blow your mind sometimes when you see behind the scenes of creative videos like that. I thought it looked pretty cool with the angles and the creative expression certainly of it. And one of the kind of end results of being at that shoot is that we have an interview with Brad, on audio format, which we'll play a little bit later in the podcast. But speaking of audio and interviews of another sort, Dave, you managed to sit down with Sebastian Rissa, who from the very beginning, I think he was actually one of the chief architects of the Moto3 race program for KTM when they started back in 2011 and went into the 2012 season and took victory straight away with Red Bull KTM Ayo and Sandro Cortese. He's been prominent all the way through the project and development with the RC16, building things up, not just at the racetrack itself, because he's at every Grand Prix, but behind the scenes in Mundafing, where KTM have their motorsports HQ. And you grabbed him at the Sepang test. And before we play it for our listeners, just give us a quick sort of scene setting. Where were you and what did you really want to quiz him about?
Well, we were in the Sepang at the back of the pit boxes. They had these little sort of break rooms, which are quite nice, and we were sitting in there. But I think at some point someone came in and started making coffee, so there might be a little bit of a sound of someone frothing some milk in the background. But no,
cursing profusely.
Yeah, I was cursing under my breath. You can't hear it, but it was very interesting. What I wanted to know was, okay, so we're switching to we're switching to renewable fuels. How does that affect, will it affect it this year? What does it affect in 2027? How does it affect the design process? And Sebastian was very, very interesting about this. Interesting also about sort of like the project and how it is going forward. So, yeah, I always enjoy talking to Clever Seb, as we call him. So, yes, very much enjoyed it.
Here's the interview right now.
I'm here with Sebastian Rissa. What is your title exactly? You're basically head of the MotoGP project for KTM.
Exactly, yes. So I'm the technical manager of the MotoGP team.
Yeah.
And I'm working for both teams, also including Gasgas.
Yeah. I suppose that one of the big changes we've seen this year is with e-fuels. Now, I spoke to someone from Mobil 1 in the US, Austin, last year, and that was very, very interesting. 40% had e-fuels. When I asked Corrado Cecchinelli about it, he said that he doesn't expect there to be a big difference. But one of the things that I've noticed here is everyone seems to be working on electronics. Now, everyone is always working on electronics. But how big has the change been for you, and have you had to do anything extra?
To be honest, I think, of course, the practical handling of the fuel is a little bit different depending the fuel specs. Also, if something like the e-fuel wouldn't have been introduced, so if you change supplier, you have to readapt a little bit. But the main work was really in the engine department and at the suppliers that were developing these fuels. So in the background, there's been a lot of work going on. For us on the track, it didn't change so much because these guys did a really good job.
Okay. I mean, did it take a lot of work to adapt the engine? Because the combustion is going to be not hugely different, but slightly different. And so you've got to, change the combustion chamber shapes, all those sort of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's coming from both sides, of course. But finally, we have a solution that mechanically didn't really require changes, but you need to redo all your mapping, all your dyno work, the detailed thermodynamic setup of this engine. So it's more this area that you're working on.
Okay, I mean, could you give any details about, or not details about the sort of the difference? How does this fuel burn differently, or does it take more energy to ignite, or is it still very similar?
That is, I would say, that starts with a strategic decision between the manufacturer and the fuel supplier. So they really design fuel for the properties we need, and this is why I cannot go into detail, because this was our decision together with them.
Right.
How our solution looks. How others look, we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, it's a real partnership rather than
absolutely.
So
yes.
I mean, they used to say that you start the design of the bike sort of with the crankshaft where that's going to be, and then design the rest of it around it. Now you've got to do it starts. In a meeting between the crankshaft designer and the fuel and the fuel supplier, sort of thing.
Well, not quite, but you have to decide between different priorities. To give you some examples, you can just look for the peak performance. You can look for rideability.
Yeah.
You can look for high energy, which gives you a lot of energy to use over the race distance, but doesn't automatically make the bike faster for the ultimate lap time.
No.
You can look at the density versus the volume or versus the weight.
Yeah.
The volume is where we're restricted.
Yeah.
The weight is something that you always carry, and it penalizes you in a way.
Yeah.
So it's really strategic what you have to decide first.
Right, yeah. No, I mean, it's fascinating. And will you have to go through this process again for 2027? I mean, you'll have to go through the process anyway, because the engine capacity is going to change and the engine design is going to change. The combustion chamber is going to change. The shape is going to change. So in a way, it's a good time to change in 2027.
Yes, of course. I mean, you catch many flies at once if you have to do the job once. But it's also clear that this process is not a one-off and then you're done. It's a continuous aware decision how to set your priorities, where to find the best compromise in this kind of areas. And it is not the last engine calibration you're doing. I mean, how many we are doing during a season in the development to find the specification of the next year. The engine dyno is always running.
The other big thing about, or the other big change you made last year was switching from the steel chassis, which I think was also 3D printed, to a carbon fiber frame. And that seems to be extremely successful because the riders are very, very positive about it. I remember we had a conversation once. I asked you about, why do you make the swing arm out of carbon? And you said it's because once you have the shape, then it gives you much more flexibility in changing and adapting the stiffness and all the rest of it. Is this the reason for going for carbon fiber?
I mean, there's many reasons. Of course, there's plus and minus for every solution. I think what really drove us into this area is that in the last years we have developed a lot of knowledge in this technology, and this made that decision quite similar to the previous decision to go steel, because we were specialists in this area. We were convinced we can beat others in this, and this is why we focused on this aspect. Now we have spent a lot of efforts to develop the carbon fiber technology, to find, let's say, a philosophy in the design, to understand how you need to design things to use them well. We have partnerships with suppliers, with other technology leaders that finally put us into the position where we thought we can really be ahead of the game in this area. And we see the potential. Also based on examples like you say, the swing arm on the fork, on the suspension. WP belongs to the Pira group just as us. So also there's a joint in technology and know-how. And every area where we introduced this technology, finally we made a step forward, if it was just for weight or if it was for other behavior. So we were very keen to explore this. We run like a pilot project, and this was giving us a lot of insight and gave a lot of positive comments and data. So we were going deeper and deeper, and finally in a quite short lead time arrived at a point where we could test with the race riders in Misano. And then we decided to race it in Smotegi.
Yeah, exactly, and it's been extremely successful. And like I say, when you talk to the riders, even Pedro Acosta, he got a chance to ride the thing, and he was quite positive about it. So it does seem to be a step forward. It's interesting you said about WP, because WP also used a lot of carbon fibre to make fork tubes and that sort of thing, and that is a transferable technology throughout the Pira Mobility Group. That's what you're saying, basically.
I mean, the detailed technology is different for every part you're doing, because carbon fiber design has to really be done for the load case that you expect. And of course, when you look, for example, at an outer tube, it has to be of a certain shape.
Yeah.
So the production process is quite different. But we know the people that know how to make those processes. Yeah. And they can also make other processes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's understanding how to do it is the key piece of knowledge, and then it's just learning the fine detail sort of thing. I remember, finally, about testing. I remember after the Portimao test last year, things just on the timesheets didn't look particularly promising. I remember getting a lot of stick for not mentioning Jack Miller in my season preview, because there are too many riders to mention. And then Jack went and had a fantastic start of the season. How do you? I mean, it does feel like you have a process that you run through, and it's not necessarily related to lap times at a particular point in testing.
I mean, every year we learn something, and the longer we're doing this, the more I believe it's about work as hard as you can, get as much done as you can, and then put it together for the first race. Especially when you get a new rider which you cannot judge in this moment, how big
Yeah.
this difference is between his racing mentality versus his approach in the testing, how much he relies on just to make a step, or how much he needs to put it together already in the test to have the confidence there. I think this is what we saw last year, but I 100% believe this also this year. It does not matter where we will be in the timesheets. We will have to be happy with our work and with the progress, convinced of the progress we made, and then in the first race we will see.
Do you think also, like, the lack of testing time that we have now means that it makes test results much more difficult to read because people are, you don't have very many test tires, you can't throw tires easily to make a fast time, there's less in-season testing, testing is much more restricted, and so you have to focus much more on finishing, getting through the list of stuff that you need to do, understanding the things that you need to understand, and you're prepared to sacrifice sort of, that single fast lap at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. I think depending the strategy you're running in this test, how much you focused on, say, in the development ultimate lap time, or in the development or end of race performance, versus how much you're testing that is compromising the chance to even make a lap time. I would say there's half second to 1 second just in this decision. And that's something you don't see in the timesheets.
Mm. Finally, two last questions. Firstly, Pedro Acosta, everyone I've spoken to about has been extremely impressed with him. How have you spoken to him? Have you worked with him? What's your impression been so far?
No, absolutely. It's really impressive how quick he's learning, how quick he's absorbing everything that you put to him. And at the moment he's like a white sheet, very neutral to all the aspects of the bike, trying to learn from the best of each aspect. And up to now, it goes rather very easy for him to do this difficult process. So we are very, very curious what happens in the next days.
Because you've had a lot of rookies in the past couple of years.
But none like this, that is clear. Exactly.
Finally, are you going to win the championship this year? I mean, I wouldn't have asked you this at the beginning of last season because things were looking it didn't look that way, and yet you had a really successful year with Brad finishing fourth and really making life difficult for the Ducatis. But do you think you're going to be closer?
Well, I mean, we work on this every moment of our life at the moment. So we will see how far it brings us. I'm sure we can make a step. How much of a step the others do is not in our hands, and we don't know. But I think the first races will tell already if you have a chance. And if we have it, we will try to grab it.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Seb. Appreciate that.
Nice one, Dave. Before we crack on, Fly Racing has long been one of the most innovative manufacturers of off-road safety equipment and technology. The Fly Racing Formula helmet is one of the most advanced motocross helmets ever created. Tested on the most advanced equipment in the world, the Formula helmet's overall performance is the best in its class for both high-velocity crashes as well as rotational and low-speed impacts, thanks to the adaptive impact system. The Americans now have the Formula S on the market. S means smart, and it contains a sensor that can automatically contact emergency services in the event of a crash. Lots more potential also thanks to the hardware and software configuration. Check out flyracing.com for more details on the Formula S. Right, straight into our Q&A questions now. As I mentioned, we've got an interview with Brad Binder coming up again later. So before we get into that, let's hear what some of the people wanted to know from us. Firstly, Tom Groom, he says the excitement for the 2024 season builds, and it seems like it's going to be a good one with lots of talking points. He's wondering about the internal dynamics of the Yamaha team. Do we see Fabio or Alex Rins better placed to lead development of the bike? Neil, your first thoughts on this one?
I think it's a really good question. I think naturally you would say it's Fabio because he's been in that team now since 2021. been with Yamaha since 2029. He has a clearer idea of what the bike should and shouldn't be doing compared with Alex Rins. However, for me, I think a bit of a doubt remains as to Fabio's proper development capacity. We did hear at the end of last year that Cal Crutchlow had advised both Fabio and Franco Morbidelli to take a different route with the engine choice ahead of the 2023 season, which they ignored. I think Cal warned them that the 23 engine was too peaky, too aggressive. It wasn't the direction to go in, yet Quartararo and Morbidelli chose that one, and then basically complained for the best part of 10, 12, 14 races that the engine had become kind of unmanageable. And I think for Fabio, in the past there's been a bit of a rush to kind of get back to just what we know, rather than trying to explore other paths of what's available. Alex Rins was always commended during his time at Suzuki for his ability to kind of test parts and to kind of evaluate them in quite an effective way. And I think that's why Honda made such a blunder letting them kind of slip through their fingers, because I think Rins had proven kind of capacity to develop a bike and showed that at Suzuki. So I think it's quite an interesting little formula there that they've got at Yamaha. I did notice that I think they did an interview with motorsport.com, or Fabio did an interview with motorsport.com at Sepang, said that him and Rins spoke more during the Sepang test than him and Morbidelli did in 4 years as kind of teammates. So it seems that there's a kind of a decent vibe between them at the moment, and that can only be a benefit to Yamaha as a whole. But yeah, it is interesting because I think Fabio is obviously a brilliant rider. We know that, but the one thing he's unproven at is kind of his proper development capacity, I think. And Rins has shown that ability in the past. So let's see how this goes.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely the vibe that I got in Sepang as well, talking to Mario Meregali, which we had the interview, I think, on last week's show as well. They were very impressed with the way that Rins worked. I think also another advantage we have now, or Yamaha have now, is the fact that I think Rins and Quartararo are a much more balanced pair. When Morbidelli was in the factory Yamaha team, he was very much second fiddle to Fabio Quartararo. Quartararo was clearly better. He beat him just about every single session. Towards the end, Morbidelli started finding some speed, but I mean, now it really looks like Rins is going to be able to push Quartararo. His feedback was prized. Just all of the stuff that he was able to tell them. His riding is very good. He was just very, very good at helping the project. So I think he's in the. I think he's definitely an upgrade on Morbidelli. Not to say anything bad about Morbidelli, but in terms of what Yamaha need right now, they have much more for. Alex Rins is going to be much more useful. And just to come to your point, Neil, about Honda letting Alex Rins go, I think the fact that Alex Rins left opened up the door for Johan Zarco. I think Johan Zarco is quite useful as well. Is Rins better? I don't know, but I think the biggest thing that Honda have gained is of course Luca Marini, who just everyone you spoke to about Marini was just really impressed with the clarity of his feedback, the way that he was able to give you really clear and be able to prioritize, be able to say, right, this is what we need to fix now, then move on to the next thing, then move on to the next thing.
Yeah, and just quickly going back to Rins, I think Simon Crafar was saying during the Sepang test that he had spoken to some of Rins' engineers and they were amazed at his braking ability. And we know that Fabio's braking ability is what stands out in his riding. And they were saying that, Rins can actually kind of match Fabio in that regard. So I think that is definitely a positive thing for Yamaha.
Still on the subject of Yamaha, Mark B sent a question saying, generally from the Sepang test, things seem to have improved. I mean, Yamaha were faster. Do we think that the test has pushed Fabio more towards staying or leaving, or is it too early to know? Dave?
The vibe I got was very much that Fabio was much more optimistic than he was at the end of last year. I went to Sepang thinking this was going to be make or break for Quartararo. I think I came away from there thinking that, Fabio hasn't made a decision to stay, but he has postponed a decision to leave.
Neil?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think Fabio's comments were generally positive, and I think an important thing for both him and for Yamaha is that his ambitions and expectations for this year seem to be a bit more realistic. Last year, obviously, on the back of 2022, he was coming into the year thinking we haven't fixed the bike, but I want to be fighting for the championship. This year, there seems to be an acceptance that they need to kind of prioritize position before they can start thinking about wins. And he was saying, I think, on one of the days at Sepang that, he hopes to be fighting for the top 6 at the start of the year. And then it's about kind of climbing the order as the year develops. He's not really imagining him fighting for the victory at Qatar or Portimao or Texas in the first, quarter of the season. So I think that's a very important thing. He seems to be a lot more mature in how he's approaching the season. And yeah, the bike still seems quite far away from where it needs to be. But I think he was definitely impressed by Yamaha's aggressive kind of hiring policy and how the new figures that they've hired from Ducati, Max Bartolini, the new technical director in particular, the effect that that's had on the kind of approach that Yamaha's taken. So yeah, definitely, I would agree with Dave. Yeah, he's not he's certainly not decided to stay, but yeah, I think there's positive signs that could convince him still to stay.
Dave, is it also the case where, if Fabio looks over the garden fence at the state of the garden on the other side, I mean, there might not be that many other desirable options. Perhaps he could become an HRC rider and put another €1 million in his bank account. But then, where does that leave him? I mean, I think it's as much about the market and the field and the opportunities for Quartararo, compared to what he has at Yamaha currently.
Yeah, I mean, it is that little... It reminds me, those little puzzles you get where there's one square missing and you have to shift all of the squares around. That's very much how the rider market feels. And, Fabio Quartararo is going to look, and he's going to look at what other factories are doing. KTM looks full up. Brad Binder is signed up, and that second seat, if KTM decide to get rid of Jack, then the person they move in will be Pedro Acosta. So, like KTM are full. Ducati are going to sign Pecco Bagnaia very soon. I suspect that there will be an announcement possibly at the Qatar test or possibly shortly afterwards. Then you've got that other seat, but you've got Jorge Martin going for it. You've got Enea Bastianini, who look quite good going for it. Maybe Marc Marquez. Maybe Marc Marquez goes there. Maybe someone else comes off there. Maybe Joan Mir says, "I fancy a go on a Ducati." So there's lots and lots of different options available for riders to go. So that really only leaves Aprilia, and Aprilia is a really interesting one. I think we could see one or both riders go. We know that Miguel Oliveira really wants to get on a factory Aprilia, but there's lots of other options.
Dave, are you talking about puzzles with holes just because you've assembled your new laptop and it's still working?
Exactly. I can't tell you how my little geek heart is just delighted.
Well, listen, it's good that you mentioned Aprilia because Joe Camacho sent us a question saying, are there any signs that Aprilia are getting frustrated with Maverick Vinales' performance? And if Aleix Espargaro decides to retire in 2024, then what will the factory team look like next year? Neil?
Yeah, it's another interesting question. I mean, there's no obvious signs, I would say, that they're becoming frustrated and impatient with Maverick and the kind of lack of results. I think one of the great things that Massimo Rivola has managed to do is to create an environment which really seems to be friendly and comforting to kind of riders, especially riders with a slightly, what's the right word?
Challenging personality?
Yeah, that's the diplomatic way of putting it. Yeah, slightly challenging perspective on how to do things. But I would imagine behind the scenes that there has to be some consternation that there hasn't been a massive improvement, and that there is this kind of innate ability to basically snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. like we saw so many times last year. So I would say that Aprilia are certainly looking at other options. And obviously it could be two riders that they might have to be looking for if Aleix does indeed decide to hang up his leathers at the end of this year. But I saw one or two reports that Enea Bastianini could be on Aprilia's radar. I guess you would have to be looking at Fabio Quartararo if you had anything about you, if you're Aprilia as well. And then of course Miguel Oliveira, who I think has done enough in his year as a satellite Aprilia rider to prove that he could be a very capable man to lead a factory's fortunes. So I would say that those are three riders that they're bound to be looking at. No clear signs from what we can see, I think, of frustration at Maverick. But I would have to say that they'll surely be voiced whenever the kind of the bosses are meeting behind the scenes.
Yeah, from what I've seen, I think Aprilia have been extremely supportive. I think they see Vinales' potential. But then, Dave, you were sort of listening to his media debrief at the Sepang test, and things are still not going too swimmingly with the 24 configuration for the Spaniard. I mean, he was talking about, I think, difficulty in braking. There was some reason why he wasn't able to make the lap time. And as we know, Maverick tends to be the king of the tests. So that's a little bit of a worrying sign. But then he was sort of dispelling the idea of any panic by saying we still have 2 days in Qatar. And he was quite assured that he was going to get things ready. And when it comes to Aprilia overall, let's not forget they added two riders that only really have experience of KTM technology in the Premier class. I mean, Neil, if they do bring in someone like Enea Bastianini, then they could perhaps get some of that Ducati knowledge and experience as well to further improve the motorcycle. That has to be... I mean, we have a question kind of on this a little bit later, but if you bring in someone from another manufacturer, then you're also getting that kind of knowledge. And I think that's also what KTM appreciated so much from Jack Miller and, of course, his crew, is that when he came in, he was able to bring some different kind of processes to the KTM RC16, which they hadn't really had before. I mean, you only had Johan Zarco, who came in to bring some knowledge from a satellite Yamaha, and that was it. So, Miller worth more than just the results, it would seem, just for the development of the project overall.
Yeah, I mean, the development is just incredibly important. Just having someone in who can give you feedback and give you pointers and say, this is what you need to be prioritizing about. I did have a private conversation with a senior figure in a rival factory, and they were, their point was basically what we've said as well, which is that Maverick Vinales is incredibly talented. He just has this amazing potential, but he never seems to be able to put it all together. He just seems to be too... he doesn't have the mental strength, the mental ability to actually put something together to actually challenge for a championship in MotoGP. He always seems to find a way to trip himself up. So I think he is... I think his position is... vulnerable, and a lot is going to happen. Is going to depend on what happens with Aleix Espargaro. Aleix still seems quite, he's quite happy. He's quite competitive. He is heading towards retirement. I wonder because he'll have little chats with his brother Paul, and like Paul was quite upset last year when he lost his ride. But I had a brief little chat with him, and he was saying yes, he missed the race, but then he remembered just the stress. It was so stressful. Modern MotoGP right now is so incredibly stressful because you make one mistake at the beginning of the season, and that's it. Your season's pretty much over, and you have to be on it right from Friday morning. Then you've got the sprint race, then you've got the main race, and it's just so incredibly stressful that actually being able to step back from that can be quite appealing. And we know that Aleix is a big cyclist. He might actually fancy having a little bit more time to spend with his beloved bicycle.
On the subject of riders and returning to KTM, we have some special interview audio with Brad Binder. As I mentioned earlier on in the podcast, I was at the studio and the photo shoot, and this went towards one of the TV interviews that was distributed to various channels afterwards. But we thought it might be quite cool to play it here in the podcast. So here's a little chat with Brad Binder. Brad, 11th, 6th, and 4th. So is 2024 the moment of truth?
Well, 2024 for me is going to be a big season for sure. like we just said, the trajectory is on its way up. 11th, 6th, and 4th. So I have no doubt we're going to do better than 4th. Last season was great at times, but extremely difficult on other days too. I felt like we had more in the pocket and we could have achieved more. So it's always good to go into the off season still really hungry and wanting to achieve a lot more. And that's how I felt this year. So for me, it's awesome to be starting 2024 and looking forward to getting back on the bike.
10 years now with KTM. Tell us some of the reasons why this relationship has gone on for so long. What's been the reason for creating that special blend with the group?
Basically, it's been 10 seasons I've already been with. Well, it's going to be my 10th season. I've been racing for Red Bull KTM Factory Racing. And it's been an amazing journey. We've had great times together. We've had days which have been amazing. We've had days that have been super tough and times that have been hard, but we've always stuck together and we've always had the same goal in mind. And so I think we fit really well together. Yeah, I'm so happy where I am. And now the only thing left is to try and finish the job off in MotoGP.
How would you say you're different to the 19-year-old Brad Binder 10 years ago, both sort of personally and professionally?
Obviously, I think I've grown up a lot since then. Obviously, I have a lot more experience now. I understand things much better. I think I'm quite a lot calmer for sure. I understand what I'm doing and how to go fast rather than just try and go crazy and see what happens. If I look back and I think, well, to see where I am now 10 years ago, I think, I would be super stoked if I could look into the future back then. So I'm really happy about that. But like I said, there's a lot of work still to do, and let's try to finish the job off.
You're going to have 44 races next year. Give us an assessment of how tough 2023 was physically and mentally, and do you feel the preparation and the changes you made for last season will, help you for this year?
I feel like 2023 for us was a breakthrough year. I think things were very static for us, 2021, 2022, and then last season we made a huge step forward. The bike was way more competitive. We were fighting up front most weekends. We were always around that podium battle. Managed to win a couple sprint races. So I felt like that was a good step for us. For me, it was clear that we still needed to work in some key areas. But other than that, I was really happy because I felt like we were starting to achieve or be racing more at the sharp end where we need to be. So that was great for us. But this season is where I think we can make the difference.
What about you personally, Brad? I mean, how difficult was it to adapt to the new sprint format last year and then also face an enlargement of that program for this season?
With our new schedule over a weekend, it's so important to start strong already on a Friday morning because by the time Saturday comes, you're qualifying Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon, you've got to be ready to race. And that's something I think we actually did much, much, much better than expected. The sprint races worked really well for us where I think I went into last season thinking that might be the tricky part. For me, at this whole new schedule, I really enjoy it. I love racing, and I'd rather race than have a session just to go cruise around and check things. So I love the sprint races. I'm really happy to have the 44 races. For me, it's great. It's what I enjoy. It's what I love doing, and I'm all for it.
Can you talk a bit about the respect that you have for the motorcycle, but also for the whole team, the whole group of engineers behind it? Because it's a perilous sport, but then they're making something that's not only competitive, but also durable, reliable, dependable for you. Can you just talk about that sort of section of your profession?
I think MotoGP or bike racing in general, it looks like almost a one-man sport when you're on the grid and you're all lining up, but it's such a massive team effort behind the scenes. In the box, the guys are working to find every last little bit. Back at the factory, the guys are working tirelessly as well. And it's actually so impressive when you sit back and you look at the bigger picture and you see all these things coming and all the updates and all the understanding behind it and why they're doing things. And, I love my team. I have the most incredible crew behind me I could ever ask for. And, all the guys they're all flat out all the time. We all have the same goal in mind and we're never happy unless we're on top. So not too often last season, unfortunately.
Brad, on the track, it's incredibly tough, it's close and competitive. How do you kind of keep the respect for the rivals and the people around you? It must be because you have an enviable lifestyle. Fans see you, they see what you do, they see the rewards it can bring. But how do you sort of still find the rapport with people to be able to go and say, like, have a barbecue together, or just to be able to hang out post-race and talk? How is that dynamic?
Yeah, I don't really worry about it or think about it at all. I look at myself as a person that's quite okay on a motorbike. I'm not bad at racing a motorbike, but other than that, I'm completely normal. So just like everyone else on the grid. So yeah, I really enjoy what I do. I love MotoGP, and I feel like I'm the luckiest man in the world to have this job. And other than that, I think I like more, well, just as much as anybody, to go hang out with friends, have a good time, and, you know, go for a barbecue, hang out with the people, and normal stuff.
Is it quite easy for you to step outside the bubble, you know, to realize what you do for a job and your life and your passion? I mean, you said there you feel you're lucky. Do you get a chance to appreciate that and to really realize it?
You know, I think sometimes when things aren't going the way you want them to over a race weekend in particular, it's easy to kind of forget about how lucky you are and how grateful you actually need to be doing what I am doing. You know, I think MotoGP is a dream, and you sometimes forget that, okay, you're where you are now and you want so much more, and you keep striving and fighting to get there. But you've come a long way too. And if you look back, like we spoke earlier, 10 years to now, it's quite a difference. So it's crazy how things can change. Of course, for me, I have two types of my life. I find that when I'm in Europe and racing, I'm super professional. I do everything extremely well. I try to sleep well, eat well, do everything properly. Whereas I find it really important to have a couple of weeks in the off season, you know, over December, to just really sit back and, you know, just do whatever I feel like doing. Just try to forget about bikes completely. And after 5 or 6 days, you start to realize how lucky you are to have this job again, and how you're ready to get back, because, you know, it's such an exciting sport, an exciting life, and everything we do is for ourselves. You know, you train hard, you get more, you do something better, you find something new, you know, it only improves, and you can just keep building from there. So it's something that I really enjoy, and it's a life that's the only real life I know and enjoy.
Brad, can you explain to fans who see Q1 and Q2 split by milliseconds? I mean, what's it like to live in those kind of parameters? Because it's barely comprehensible. Also, how do you get back to the pit box and think, well, I need, you know, less than a tenth to be able to make this step? I mean, it doesn't seem quite understandable. How do you work it out?
For me, it's happened, I don't know how many times over my MotoGP career, where you've come in and you're in 11th position. So you just missed the cut and you're 0.3 to first. And you know over the lap, oh, geez, I missed this apex, or I was too deep on the brakes in that corner. And then you know exactly where that time was. And you know, okay, I could have done it, but this is what I did wrong. And those are the good days. The bad days is when you ride and you felt like you do everything perfect, and all of a sudden, oh, damn, I'm 11th or 12th. And, you know, you're looking for that last little bit. You know, 0.3 sounds like nothing, but when you need to do that lap after lap, it's super hard to find. And nowadays in MotoGP, it's crazy how close things are. And I try not even look at the screens, because when you see the gaps and stuff, it's just, you know, you need to go faster. Even if you're first going into your last run, you could land up in the Q1. So you need to improve every single session, because everybody is. So for me, the biggest thing I learned this season was you have to make every single lap count and use every opportunity. Otherwise, there's a very good chance it's not going to work in your favor.
Lastly, we talk just about 10 years of Red Bull KTM factory racing, but it's been a whole career of racing and competing. Where does that kind of instinct come from, do you think, within you? I mean, how does it keep enduring? How do you come back year after year and still have that same urge? It's something that's quite unusual for most people to understand.
Racing's been my entire life. Since I was small, that's all I've ever really loved and enjoyed. And it's what I like to do. And especially when you have time off, you realize how much you enjoy it and how much you really want to do it. So for me, it's always been something that I really enjoy the whole process of what I do. I love the pre-season. I love the training, getting out on your bicycle stupid early in the morning and, having a gym session in the afternoon, trying to get the bikes ready to go riding. Like all of that stuff is stuff I really enjoy. And yeah, for me, it's just really trying to improve, just get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better to try and get to the end goal, which is obviously to be a world champion.
Okay, back to the last few questions we had from Patreon. But first, Dave, you had some sort of thoughts on the Binder interview?
Well, you said that you were quite impressed by the amount of time, that all four of the KTM riders, they spend all day just hanging around the factory in Mundafing in Austria, and that's why they get paid a lot of money. The reason the MotoGP riders get paid a lot of money is to do all those sort of things. They would ride around on a motorbike for free. It's all that media nonsense that that they absolutely detest, which is no fun, which is an incredibly important part of their job, because that's what brings the money in. That's what brings the money in to pay for them. But it's also quite notable that I understand that Marc Marquez has been. His deal at Gresini is that he won't have any media responsibilities beyond the normal debriefs. He won't have to do, I don't know, whatever it is, 3 or 4 one-to-ones every Thursday at every race. It'll just be whatever Red Bull decide that he needs to do, he'll do, and the rest of the time he'll just have free to work on the bike, to work on himself and work on all the other things. So he might have given up a lot of money, but he's gained a lot of freedom.
Dave, you're not freelancing for Repsol this year, are you?
I wish. Free petrol, that'd be great. That would actually genuinely be great.
Free petrol? You'd be lucky if they let you on the forecourt.
They usually don't.
On to the next question, Rudy.
You might get an espresso if you're lucky.
Yeah.
If I was really lucky.
Rudy Batzel says that mass damper development, how important is it? And where are the other manufacturers in developing their own technology to catch up with Ducati? Dave, this is very much a question for you.
This is genuinely a really interesting question, and one that I don't have a ready answer to. What I do think is, because we all got very excited about mass dampers when they first turned up. The point about a mass damper is you have it in the tail, and it basically slows the reaction of the rear of the bike. It reduces rear pumping. We've seen mass dampers appear on other bikes. I'm not sure that I don't think the KTM has one. The Aprilia has one. The Repsol Honda has one now, but it's one of those things where you've got lots and lots of compromises. The other thing is we've seen the size of the tail on the Ducati get smaller over the years. So for Ducati, that's a sign that for Ducati it's become less important as other aspects of the bike become more important. I think the gains that they've made from ride height devices and from aero have cancelled out some of that. And also, the thing about aero is it induces load. If you've ever... So this is a bit of a weird sort of comparison. There is, to get round into my garden, into my back garden, there's a very narrow, tight little alleyway, which I have to cycle through. We have to cycle around, and the way that I cycle around it is by using the back brake, because the back brake introduces some tension into the chassis, into the frame of the bike, into the feeling of the bike, and it makes it sort of ironically makes it easier to handle the bike. I think my theory is that this aero is doing the same thing with a MotoGP bike. It's introducing more tension into the bike, and it's actually adding stability. We know that the bikes are much more stable. Also, we've got the aero on the rear. All that is just stabilizing the rear that much more, and so it's actually reducing the importance of the mass damper, if you see what I mean.
Dave, I don't believe a word you say until Peter Bomb comes around to your house and tries to cycle around the whole building, recording data on his way.
To be honest, he does occasionally pop round and get his bicycle and then go cycling in the cycling up the Dutch mountain here. There's some excellent mountain bike paths up there.
Well, Rudy, I hope that kind of went some way to answering your question, but it's a big subject, so maybe we can tackle it again a little bit later in the season, especially if we see any new tech hovering around in the pit lane at all. Neil, this is a special question for you because I know you're such a big Swiftie. DJ Purchase says, is there a chance that Taylor Swift breaks up with her current boyfriend, dates a MotoGP star, increasing both US attention as well as female enthusiasm for the sport, thereby saving the motorcycle industry? I don't think there's any tongue in cheek there. I think, there's a very serious strand going on.
Yeah, shout out to DJ Purchase, one of our patrons. It is something that I think MotoGP organisers would absolutely love and fall over themselves to have a situation like that. I'm not an NFL fan at all. I have no interest whatsoever in the Super Bowl. But any news items that I saw relating to the Super Bowl on Monday were just photos of basically Taylor Swift, either in the stands watching or like hugging her boyfriend after the game had finished. So, the NFL with a massive kind of profile in the States was basically trying to squeeze that Taylor profile for all it was worth. And yeah, I guess having a kind of figure like that would be an attractor for the Swifties out there, which I think are quite numerous, quite outspoken as well. Bring back Paris Hilton is what I say, who obviously had her own 125 team, I think, back in the day with Maverick Vinales.
It wasn't hers. Basically, what it was a link up. She was an influencer avant la lettre for, I think, Pasha, the nightclub on. The nightclub on one of the Balearic Islands, and so she was basically sort of signed up for to turn up at races from time to time, and so we used to see Paris Hilton on the grid. That worked very well.
Was this before or after the video?
Oh, after. No, it was definitely after. It's definitely after. I had to think about which video you meant there for a moment. That's it's been such a long time.
I was reading that apparently like 123 million people watched the Super Bowl between the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers. And it's the largest TV audience ever in US history. And that's across all platforms.
It always is. It always is. It's always the biggest TV show. I mean, it's a shame Steve couldn't join us because, this is very much his jam. But yeah, it's the biggest TV sort of event of the year. But then if you look at TV ratings, I think NFL games are, of the top 10 most popular TV programs of any weekend, eight of them will be NFL games.
Well, it's quite staggering that some experts are attributing part of this audience increase, I think it's up by over 10 million people compared to 2023, down to Taylor Swift. But as sad as it seems, it's a thing.
Yeah, but the thing is, what Taylor Swift can do. I once sat in the lobby of a very cheap Indonesian hotel or Malaysian hotel, where the girls behind the counter were playing Taylor Swift all evening, and it was perfectly anodyne. Pleasant, forgettable pop music. But the thing is, she does speak to young women especially. And young women are an incredibly powerful, incredibly important demographic to attract. If you go to a race in Spain, you'll see lots and lots of young kids, young girls, young boys, young children, families, and the ability to get young women into a sport is very good for growing the sport. Boys will generally watch sport anyway. They're brought up, they're socialized to watch sport from the beginning, which young women aren't. And I think that it's a way of expanding the profile, expanding the profile and the popularity of the sport, and more eyeballs means more money, which is good for everyone. Even though a lot of people love the fact that MotoGP is like a niche sport. They love the feel of the sport. That I think is. I can appreciate that. It is nice to sort of not trip over billions of people, but it's just better all round if there's lots. If you have a really high profile to your sport, because it means you get lots of fans.
Yeah, my 15-year-old son was trying to understand how that many people could watch a sport that is basically exists within two coastlines. I mean, the NFL do have exhibition games. I'm not even sure if they're league games in the UK and also in Germany recently. I think for the first time, the NFL is actually coming to Spain next year. And, the answer was, I told him, is that there's media saturation for it. I mean, you can sit there watching sport channels with coverage of this stuff 24/7. And that's, of course, something you just don't have in Europe for certain. I mean, you do have it for certain sports like football. But then I also read a good article on the athletic.com website where they were asking, could the whole glitz and entertainment aspect of the Super Bowl and like the halftime show translate into something like football? And then I was thinking, could you even have it on the grid? Because we have maybe 40 minutes of build-up time before a MotoGP race at 2 p.m. traditionally. If you had some musician playing a 10 to 12-minute set there on the grid, would that also be something that, in terms of promotional entertainment aspects, would it work? I mean, let's not forget that Dawn of Sports now have an American CCO. I think that's the right description. Sorry, Dan Russell Mondo, if I've got it wrong. But, he would be bringing that kind of thinking, that kind of transformational, conceptualized stuff to MotoGP to try and increase that audience awareness, Dave.
Yeah, I mean that's very much the point about it. Like that kind of expanding the audience is really, really important. And bringing on show. I mean, we're seeing it with World Superbikes. They announced they're going to be doing a sunset race in Portimao during the summer, which is going to be great. That's going to be really fun. And then they turn that into more and more of a spectacle. One of the reasons that Le Mans is such a popular round is because it is almost impossible to get bored. There is always something going on apart from the traditional murdering of the journalist. But there's always something happening, and that I think is it's really important. It is first and foremost, professional sport is an entertainment product because the professional in it means that people are getting paid money, and the money has to come from somewhere. That doesn't have to detract from the sporting aspects of it, because the Super Bowl or the NFL is not fixed. It is very much a pure sporting contest. It's just that it's a pure sporting contest which has been tailored precisely for TV. TV and entertainment has an incredible amount of input into the way that it looks and feels.
Tailored swiftly for TV, Dave.
Oh!
How did you miss that one? Come on.
Yeah, no, well, that's right. That's the sort of dad joke that I'd expect the dad of this podcast, Mr. Wheeler, to make.
Please, I have a higher level than that. I can't believe we talk much more about Taylor Swift than we did about mass dampers. I mean, that's maybe that's saying something about the Paddock Pass podcast these days.
Mass dampers are a more. I mean, like there's facts involved in that, and a lot less about opinions.
I know that Neil will be mass damping about Taylor Swift at some point later on in the day, so perhaps we should be moving on. We had another question from Mark B, a little bit more serious. Non-compete clauses, with Ducati engineers being picked up by the likes of KTM, Yamaha and others. Are there any constraints on what they can do? Are they free just to sort of dump all that IP straight into another hands of a manufacturer? What are our thoughts here?
Yes, they are free to do it, and they do. I remember, because it's the same with riders, basically. I remember when Andrea Dovizioso left Repsol Honda to join Yamaha on the evening of basically on the Monday evening, I walked past the Yamaha truck, and Andrea Dovizioso was in there with about 1,000 Yamaha's engineers, just listening to what he has to say. And it's the same for energies, for engineers. They can and do take people with them. I mean, like when we spoke to Davide Barana earlier at the Ducati launch, he said exactly the same thing. they go and they take their knowledge with you, and you do lose that. But there's nothing you can do about it. I think there is also a difference between US employment law and EU employment law, where non-compete clauses are they're much more difficult to enforce here. I certainly in the software engineering world where I have worked previously, we would occasionally get people who would try and enforce non-compete clauses, but they were basically rendered irrelevant. They didn't want you to do things. The way that non-compete clauses usually work in Europe is that you're not allowed to go and work for a company, set up your own company, and then go and steal their clients. That's what you're not allowed to do. That what you can do is take the knowledge that you've gained and use it in a different way. So yeah, I think that a large part of it is the difference between EU and US employment law. But the other thing is you would literally, with a non-compete clause, you would basically be putting someone out of work.
Thanks, Dave. Good stuff. We're at the end of our question and answer session from Patreon. We've got one more just from Matong or Matonge. Sorry if I said that poorly. Neil, for you first, this is a bit of a four-parter. Was Marc Marquez really sandbagging in Sepang to avoid extra pressure?
I heard Simon Griffar saying this, that he had seen him run repeatedly wide into the final turn, and he thought maybe there was a bit of sandbagging going on. I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think it was just genuine adaptation going on. Obviously, massive adaptation going on at that. And, it wasn't as if he was slow. He put in a pretty handy time attack at the end of day 3, finishing up in 6th. So, no, I think what we saw on the timesheets is kind of what we saw on the timesheets is pretty much where Mark is at, from what I can see.
I don't really like the word sandbagging because it sounds like I think to be able to sandbag, you have to have the entire situation under control. I think what we saw with Mark was he just had different priorities. He was too busy figuring out how to go fast on the Ducati, learning how, or trying to understand what the bike needs, how to ride it, how to adapt his riding style, all the rest of it. And so he's less focused on, banging out a really fast lap. He did try, a time attack, but he was trying a time attack for himself, not to impress others. Pecco Bagnaia, Jorge Martin, especially Jorge Martin, that they were out there trying to intimidate each other. So they were pushing to the limit because they were doing something else, but they can push to the limit because they understand this bike in deep, intensely. They've been riding it for a couple of years. They feel this bike, they understand it. You might say, Pecco Bagnaia could sandbag if he wanted to. I think in the terms of Marc Marquez, I think it's a bit more complicated than that. I think it's more about prioritizing what you want to work on than sandbagging.
Yeah, it's far too soon. I mean, the adaptation process with Ducati is still going on. So, there are our thoughts on that one. Secondly, is the beast Enea Bastianini back? Was he actually fast at the tests, or was it just the Sepang factor? Who wants to take this one on?
I'll let you know next week after the Qatar test. Maybe that will be a fairer indication of whether the beast is back. It looked great. Certainly the noise is coming out of Ducati where that Enea is kind of returning and is approaching his 2022 self rather than last year. What he was saying, just a lot less pressure that he's going into this season with compared to last year, where it was a new team, new crew chief, new surroundings. He's kind of got that under his belt now. He's had a year of that experience. And once again, he's got a point to prove. He's kind of like Jorge Martin last year. He now has to kind of show once again that he's deserving of the seat that he has. So I think the signs are good, but we do also have to add the caveat that Sepang was the one good track that Enea had last year.
Dave, you're prohibited from answering this next question, so you might as well just put yourself on mute. Based on Sepang, what would the front row at Qatar race look like, Neil? Considering there's only 3 spots and Dave can't go through the whole 22 rider grid, I'm going to ask you for your opinion on this one.
Well, Bagnaia, Marini, Zarco, Rins, Quartararo, Morbidelli. Oh, no, sorry, that's Dave's approach. Right now, I would say Pecco, Martin, Bastianini.
Right. Okay, so you're going all Ducati. Ducati are out front from Qatar. Okay, that'd be interesting to see. Let's see what happens at the test next week. And Dave, you do get the last one. Tire pressure regulations, are they going to ruin the season?
Yes, but less than we think. There is a lot of talk around it, and again, Pit Barra said the same thing. There was also talk in Sepang about this. What looks like happening is the tire well, first of all, we're going to be dropping minimum tire pressures. We'll be going down to probably 1.85 instead of 1.88. Piero Taramasso told me last year he felt that 1.85 was the lowest they could possibly go. It also looks like because at the moment, if you're below the minimum pressure for 50% of the race, you're going to be automatically disqualified. I get a strong sense from all sorts of people, and also what both Francesco Guidotti and Pit Barra were saying, that is still not fixed yet. So there could be a different penalty. People will be penalised, but they won't be disqualified. I suspect that we will stick with some kind of time penalty. I think that is a much better system overall. Yes, it's not ideal, but we'll have to wait and see how that works out.
I also thought Pitt was pretty interesting in his debrief, talking about some of the discussions of the MSMA and also the GPC, the Grand Prix Commission, for the rule changes for 2027. I mean, he was quite frank that, there will be, of course, aerodynamics still in MotoGP, but they're going to be a lot more basic, a lot more reduced. I mean, he was dropping some sort of crumbs that we might see, or at least they're talking about. There's no confirmed direction yet, of course. But, he was, that was good that he has that sort of transparency to say, this is what KTM want. This is what we want, and this is the way that the sport's probably going to head.
Yeah, but also we're going to see a reduction in capacity, and that will naturally mean that we'll go from sort of 300 horsepower to 65 to 70-ish, and so aerodynamics will naturally become less important, because aerodynamics is the reason that we have so much aerodynamics is because we have so much horsepower. And the reason we have so much horsepower is because we have so much aerodynamics. Reduce the capacity, drop the amount, move to 100% the renewable fuel, and then you get a different sport. It changes a lot, and so we'll see less aerodynamics.
Well, that's it this week. We'll wrap the Qatar test next week and also preview the start of World Superbike season with Steve and Gordo on another podcast. Don't forget to send us your questions or comments through SoundCloud, YouTube, or wherever you get your file. Also, remember to join us on Patreon, take advantage of that 10% discount offer for the year, and join our competition for 2 Paddock passes to a Grand Prix of your choice. We will be making the draw across the weekend of the opening Grand Prix at the LaSalle International Circuit. Dave, Neil, thanks for all the verbal diarrhea. Everyone else, thanks for listening.